What's going on, guys? Welcome to the next part in the news section. In the last part, we brought in our floating panel dependency and started to actually see our panel here in our simulator. In this part, we're going to start to build out the news controller that's going to represent the content in here. To basically build out its foundation. So that all said, let's jump right in. So we created a top stories view controller, news view controller, and instead of calling it top stories, which will make this, be a little isolated in terms of what the functionality can do, let's rename this to just be a news view controller, which will allow us to use this component in a reusable fashion should we choose to, extend our app later on. Always good to make your components as reusable as possible. So cool, now that we have a news view controller, let's talk about what we want to accomplish in here. Basically, we're going to have a table view that is going to render out stories for us. We're going to want to fetch actual news, and we want this controller to be configurable to either fetch top stories, or we're going to want it to be configurable to fetch, information and news about a particular company, provided that we pass in a company symbol maybe. So for Apple, it would be AAPL. So it's quite a bit of things we need to do, so let's jump right in. So we had created this table view here as a simple table view. I'm going to go ahead and create it with an anonymous closure because we're going to want to configure a couple of things on this guy. Namely, we're going to want to register cells, and we're also going to want to register a cell, I should say, and a header view. So here we've got a table. We're going to say set up the table, and we're going to say fetch news. So we want to create both of these functions, and we're going to want to lay out said table. So I'm going to go ahead and override this guy. This is going to be view.bounds to make it the entirety of the size. And in terms of the functions, we're just going to declare these like so. That's our first one. Here is our next one. Now we're also going to want to go ahead and open up different news stories within our app, right? So what we call a Safari view controller that's inside your app. So we'll want a function for that. So we'll say private func open URL, which will take in a URL, and then we'll want to do stuff in there as well. So these are kind of the basics. Now, how do we make this controller configurable? And what the heck does that mean? Basically, we want to have a enum on here, which is going to specify what type of controller we, are creating. Is it top stories or is it for a given company? Now you'll notice that I used these backticks to create this here. And the reason we need to do that is because the word type is a keyword in Swift with a capital T. So if you want to use the term type as a name for an enum or an object, you got to use these backticks, which is what I hope they're called. It's the key next to your one on the left of it. And the two cases we're going to support are going to be top stories, and the other one is going to be for a given company, where the company would provide, or rather the caller would provide a company symbol. Now we're also going to want to show a title in this controller, and the title we're going to derive from the particular case we're looking at. So we're going to say, if the current case is top stories, I'm going to go ahead and return the title for top stories. Pretty simple. And in the company case, we have this symbol as a associated value. So we're going to return symbol dot uppercase. So this is how we're going to denote, or notate, I should say, the different type that's available. Now we want to also force the controller to be instantiated with a given type. So I'm going to say this takes in a type. We're going to say self.type equals type. And of course, up here, we want to have a instance member for the given type. We'll say type is of type type, which is super confusing, type of type, but hopefully that's with this here, you guys get the points. And here we want to make sure we don't forget to say super init, nil, and nil. We'll also want the required initializer. We'll say fatal error. And let's start to add in some of our mark comments, since we're getting a little verbose in our code and we want to keep things nice and organized. These are initializers here. And down here we've got some private functions. Now our table view setup function here, we're going to want to do a couple of cookie cutter things, aka add it as a subview, set the delegate to self, set the data source to self as well. And you guys know the drill. We want to conform to the delegate and data source protocols. So I'm going to do it in an extension down here to keep things nice and organized and clean. We'll say table view delegates. And we also want our trusty data source. Now we're going to say number of rows. And here we're going to return 0 for now. We're also going to want cell for row at index path, and I'm just going to return a actual cell right now. We're going to hook this up appropriately later on. What else are we going to want in here? We're also going to want a way to specify the height for row. And the height we're going to presumably use off the top of my head for each of these cells is 140. You can change these as you see fit. We'll also want a way to select a given news article, a news story, to presumably open it. So we're going to say deselect it with an animation. And let's see what else we want. We're going to want to have a header. So in the actual news table view, we want to have a header up here that says, is it top stories? Is it for Apple? What are we seeing news for? So we are also going to want 2 more functions here. Let me put it right here. First one is going to be height for header, as I believe what I'm looking for here. And I'm going to return perhaps 70. I'm arbitrarily making up numbers. We'll adjust as needed. And the most important one with the header is the actual view for the header, because what is a header without an actual header view? And in here, we're going to want to create and return that header. For now, I'll return nil because we'll set this up later on. So let's go ahead and give this a run. Hopefully, we shouldn't be crashing, but let's double check that we aren't. So go ahead and give it a run. Looks like we cannot build, which is good because that means that we need to actually pass in a type here. So in our floating panel, we're going to say that we're creating this controller for not stop stories, top stories. If I can stop making typos, there we go, top stories. Go ahead and give it a run. Hopefully everything is still building. We expect to still see an empty panel, but hopefully no crashing. All right, here's one thing that we want to fix right off the bat. We see our table view there. It's got black as a background, aka the system background. We don't want to use that. We're going to use a clear color actually, because we want the panel color to bleed through. So we'll say table.background color is clear, just like that. And we're going to have the cells not have a background color as well. So let's see. All right, looking pretty good. So we don't have a background color there. It does look like our panel here is a little lighter. So we'll make sure to adjust as needed. But for now, looking pretty good. We're in good shape to progress with building out our news API and plumbing some data in here. So that's all I've got for this part. Thanks for sticking around. We're coming along pretty nicely. I'll see you guys in the next part.